The revolver felt heavier than it should. Margot Brennan raised it with both hands. Aimed at the shadow materializing through the storm, her finger found the trigger, squeezed. Not enough to fire. Not yet. The tent canvas exploded behind her, ripping free from its stakes, tumbling across the dirt like a massive broken bird. Everything they owned. Just like that. 4 months since Daniel died burning with fever. 3 months clawing survival from dirt and desperation. And now this. A stranger on horseback, riding toward her through darkness. She'd aimed this gun at 2 men already. Never fired it, didn't trust her aim, couldn't spare the ammunition. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like an ending. The rider reined his horse 20 feet away. Dismounted. Slow. Deliberate. Hands visible, ma'am. Deep steady despite the wind. You can't stay out here tonight. Margot's arms shook from holding the revolver up. Her heart hammered. Her mind screamed run. But her body, her exhausted, failing body, couldn't move. State your business? Her voice cracked. Then ride on. The cowboy took 1 step forward, and everything changed. The Wyoming Territory had no mercy in the summer of 1873. Margot had learned that lesson written in dust and hunger, and the constant ache of loss that settled in her bones like an old injury. The kind that hurt worse when storms came. And a storm was coming. She sat outside the pathetic structure she couldn't honestly call a tent anymore. More a collection of torn canvas and rotting rope, and desperate prayers. Somehow it still provided shade during scorching days, inadequate shelter when temperatures plummeted at night. Her hands bore calluses now, and cuts that refused to heal. Once these hands kneaded bread dough in a proper kitchen. Once they were soft. Once they belonged to a woman who had a future. Now they dug for roots. Stretched fabric to cover her children. Gripped a revolver she barely knew how to fire. Adelaide sat beside her, 8 years old, with an expression too serious. Too worried. Too aware of how close to the edge they all teetered. No child should look that old. Nathaniel played in the dirt nearby. 5 years old. Thin arms pushing around a stick he pretended was a horse, making clip-clop sounds that would have been endearing if they weren't so heartbreaking. The boy had stopped asking when they'd have a real meal, when they could sleep in a real bed, when Papa was coming back. He'd learned those questions had no good answers. And then there was Violet, barely 3 years old, dozing fitfully in Margot's lap, whimpering even in sleep. Too thin, cheeks hollow, eyes too large in her small face. Margot felt the terrible lightness of her daughter's body, knew with sick certainty they couldn't survive much longer like this. The rider reined his horse to a stop about 20 feet away, far enough to be non-threatening, but close enough that Margot could make out his features in fading light. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, dark hair visible beneath his hat, strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that were hard to read in the dimness, but seemed to be assessing the situation with more concern than menace. "Evening, ma'am." His voice was steady, deep, carrying easily over the rising wind. "Name's Wyatt Thorne. I'm the foreman at Thornhill Ranch. About 5 miles east of here." He paused, glancing at the tent, at the children, at Margot's defensive posture. "Mean no harm. Just riding back from town and saw your camp. Got a storm coming in hard. You and the young ones planning to ride it out here?" Margot's grip on the revolver didn't loosen. "Our plans are our own business, Mr. Thorne. We'll manage." Even as she said it, a particularly strong gust of wind hit the tent, and Margot heard the ominous sound of canvas ripping further, one of the support ropes snapping with a sound like a gunshot. Adelaide gasped. Pressed against her mother's side, Wyatt Thorne's expression tightened. "Ma'am, that tent's not going to last through what's coming. I can see it's torn in 3 places already. And those stakes won't hold in mud once the rain starts. We've weathered storms before," Margot interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm sure you have," Wyatt said calmly. "But ma'am, this one's going to be bad. You got what? Maybe 20 minutes before it hits. And when it does, that's not going to protect anyone." As if to punctuate his words, thunder rumbled in the distance. Deep and threatening, Violet woke with a startled cry, and Nate abandoned his play area to run to Margot's side, wrapping his thin arms around her legs. Margot felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. Pride said to send this stranger away. To handle this crisis the way they'd handled everything else. Alone. Desperate. Barely surviving. But maternal instinct whispered something different. Mama. Adelaide whispered. Close to her ear, I'm scared. The wind gusted again. Harder this time. And Margot felt the first cold drops of rain on her face. What exactly are you offering, Mr. Thorne? She heard herself ask. There's a foreman's cabin about a mile from here, Wyatt said promptly. Been empty for a few months since the last foreman moved on. It's nothing fancy. One room, stone fireplace, wooden floor, solid roof. But it's dry and it's safe. I'm offering to take you and your children there for the night. He glanced at the darkening sky. Tonight you need to be somewhere that canvas and tent stakes can't fail you, and what do you expect in return? The question came out harder than Margot intended. But she had to know. Wyatt's jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment something that might have been hurt flashed in his eyes. Nothing, ma'am. You'd be helping maintain ranch property. That cabin should have someone in it. It was a lie. Margot knew it, a polite fiction to let her accept help without feeling like charity. But it was a kind lie, another crack of thunder. Closer now. Made the decision for her, all right, just for tonight, just until the storm passes. The ride through the storm seemed to last forever, and no time at all. Margot lost all sense of direction, simply trusting that this stranger knew where he was going, hoping desperately that she hadn't made a terrible mistake, rain lashing at them from every direction. The world reduced to flashes of lightning, followed by darkness so complete Margot couldn't see anything at all. She held her children tight, felt Violet crying against Wyatt's chest, heard Nate whimpering. Felt Adelaide trembling but silent. Then through the rain she saw it, the dark shape of a structure. Small but solid looking, the cabin. Inside quickly, Wyatt was off the horse in one smooth motion, reaching up to take Violet, then helping Nate and Adelaide down. Finally offering Margot his hand to dismount. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. Get everyone inside. I need to tend to the horse. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Margot gathered her children and stumbled into the cabin, just as another crack of thunder shook the sky. For a moment, they all just stood there in the darkness, dripping and shaking, too stunned to do anything else. Then Adelaide found her voice. Mama, are we safe? Margot wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise that they were safe, that everything would be fine, but she'd learned that promises were fragile things. We're out of the storm. That's enough for right now. The door opened, perhaps 3 minutes later, and Wyatt stepped inside. Rain streaming from his hat and coat. He closed the door firmly behind him. There's a lamp here somewhere, he muttered. Light flared, small at first as Wyatt lit a lamp on a table near the door, but it grew and spread as he adjusted the wick. It was as Wyatt had said. Nothing fancy, one large room, maybe 15 feet square, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a narrow window on each of the other 3 walls, and a plank floor that was weathered but solid. There was a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall, a small wood stove, and several shelves that held a few basic supplies. Compared to the tent, it looked like a palace. Violet had stopped crying and was staring around with wide eyes. Nate's hand had loosened its death grip on Margot's skirt. Even Adelaide seemed to relax slightly. It's not much, Wyatt said, moving to the fireplace where wood had been laid ready, but it's dry, and it's solid. Let me get this fire going. When he looked up, Margot could see his face more clearly. In the lamplight, he looked younger than she'd initially thought. Maybe late 20s. With strong features and eyes that were surprisingly light brown. Almost amber, ma'am. Your floor. We're dripping all over it. It's a floor. It'll dry your people. That's more important. The simple matter-of-factness of the statement did something to Margot's carefully maintained emotional walls. She felt them crack, just slightly. What got the affair going with the efficiency of long practice? And within minutes, warmth was beginning to spread through the cabin. Now then, there should be some old blankets in that chest by the bed. Ma'am, why don't you help the children out of those wet clothes? I'll see what I can find for supper. The casual mention of supper made Nate's head whip around so fast Margot heard his neck crack. Supper? The boy breathed. Yes, son, supper. Can't have you going to bed hungry, can we? Something flickered across Wyatt's face. Pain, maybe, or anger. Though Margot sensed it wasn't directed at them. It had been 2 days since they'd had what could reasonably be called a meal. The fact that this stranger seemed to understand that, seemed to care about that, was almost more than she could process. The smell of cooking cornmeal was making Margot lightheaded with hunger. She realized she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Having given her small portion to Violet, who had been crying from hunger pains, "Should be ready in about 10 minutes, Wyatt said, stirring the pot that now hung over the fire. "It's just Johnny cakes and beans. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill your bellies." "It smells like heaven," Adelaide whispered, and Margot had to agree. When he finally announced the food was ready, Nate actually whimpered with anticipation. Watt served the children first. Generous portions that made Margot want to weep. The Johnny cakes were hot and filling. The beans were seasoned with some kind of pork fat that made them rich and satisfying. And there was enough that everyone could eat their fill. Margot watched her children devour their food with the desperate intensity of the truly starving, and she felt tears prick her eyes again. How had she let it get this bad? "Hey now," Wyatt said softly, and Margot realized a tear had escaped down her cheek. "None of that. You got them this far, didn't you?" "That's a damn miracle I failed them," Margot whispered, low enough that the children wouldn't hear. "4 months I've been failing them every single day. You've kept them alive. In this territory. In these conditions. As a woman alone? That's not failure, ma'am." After supper, the children could barely keep their eyes open. Wyatt gave up his bed without hesitation, helping Margot arrange all 3 children on the narrow mattress, where they curled together like puppies. Asleep almost before their heads touched the pillow, Margot stood looking down at them, her heart so full of relief and gratitude and residual fear that she could barely breathe. They looked peaceful for the first time in months. "They'll sleep well tonight," Wyatt said quietly from beside her. "Safe and fed and dry. That's what matters." Finally, Margot found her voice. Why would you help us? You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Wyatt was quiet for so long Margot thought he might not answer. Then, still looking at the sleeping children, he said, "When I was about that boy's age, my mother was in a situation similar to yours. My father had abandoned us. We were living in a boarding house in Kansas City, about a week away from being thrown out onto the street." He paused, and then a woman, a widow who ran a bakery, found out somehow. She offered above the bakery. No questions asked, no judgment passed. He turned to look at Margot then. "My mother always said, maybe she didn't need to repay it. Maybe she just needed to pass it forward when she had the chance." His voice roughened. "She died before she ever got that chance. Consumptions took her when I was 12. But before she passed, she made me promise. I'd remember what that baker did for us. Made me swear that if I ever had the means to help someone struggling the way we struggled, I wouldn't hesitate." Margot felt something shift in her chest. "I'm sorry about your mother, me too. But her lessons stuck, so when I saw you and those children in that tent with that storm coming, I heard her voice, clear as if she was standing next to me. I don't know how to thank you." "Then don't. Just rest tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. But tonight you've got a roof over your head. That's enough for now." And it was tonight they were safe. Tonight they were warm. Tonight her children were sleeping peacefully. Tonight was enough. Margot woke to silence, and for a confused, disoriented moment couldn't remember where she was. The silence itself was wrong. For 3 months she'd woken to wind flapping canvas, to the rustle of insects, to the open emptiness of the plains. But now there was only quiet, broken by the soft breathing of her children, and the crackle of embers in a fireplace more flooded back. She sat up quickly and looked around the dim interior. Dawn light filtered through the windows, weak and gray, but enough to see by the children were still asleep, tangled together in wool blankets. Watt was nowhere to be seen. Before her anxiety could fully take hold, the door opened, and Wyatt stepped inside carrying an armload of firewood. "Morning. Storm passed about an hour ago. Thought I'd get the fire built back up and check on things outside. Is there? How much damage?" Wyatt set the wood down near the fireplace. Your tent's pretty well destroyed, ma'am. I rode out at first light to see if anything could be salvaged. Most of what was inside is soaked through and scattered. I gathered what I could find and brought it back. It's not much. Margot had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blow. There's some clothes. A tin box that stayed sealed. The canvas itself is torn beyond use, I'm afraid. Everything. They'd lost everything. The tin box had some papers in it, looked important. And there was something wrapped in cloth that felt like it might be a book. Margot's breath caught. The Bible? The oilcloth held. It's damp around the edges but readable. Something that might have been relief crossed Wyatt's face. Figured that might matter to you. Her grandmother's Bible. The one with all the family names written in the front. It had survived. Thank you. Thank you for saving it. Just did what anyone would do, he muttered. I should wake the children. We've imposed long enough. If you could point us toward town. And then what? Wyatt interrupted. He stood and turned to face her fully. You'll walk 5 miles into Green River with 3 children. No shelter, and maybe $6 if you're lucky. And do what exactly? Margot stiffened. That's not your concern, actually. I'm making it my concern. Because if I let you walk out of here, I'm sending you right back to the situation I pulled you out of last night. Probably worse. Since now you don't even have a tent, I'll find work. In Green River? Margot, you've been trying to find work there for 3 months. What makes you think today will be different? He was right. And they both knew it. I don't know. But I can't keep accepting charity from a stranger. Here's what I propose. You and the children stay here in this cabin. It's not being used anyway. You keep the place clean. Maybe do some mending work for the ranch hands. That's not charity. That's honest work in exchange for housing. Margot stared at him. You're offering us a place to live? I'm offering you the use of an empty cabin. And I'm offering you work. Real work. Paid work. The ranch owner's housekeeper, Mrs. Halverson. She's been complaining for months that she needs help with the mending. The operation needs someone who can sew. It sounded too good to be true, which immediately made Margot suspicious. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Peace of mind. The knowledge that 3 children aren't starving on the plains. The ability to sleep at night without wondering if I should have done more. He paused. And maybe the feeling that I finally kept the promise I made to my mother. Behind them, Adelaide sat up slowly, blinking in confusion. Her eyes found Margot, checking that her mother was still there. Mama? Where are we? We're in Wyatt's cabin. How did you sleep, sweetheart? Good. I slept really good, Mama. I didn't wake up cold even once. What kind of mother had she been that her daughter considered sleeping through the night without shivering to be a miracle? Who's hungry? Wyatt asked. And Nate's hand shot up so fast he nearly fell off the bed. The ride to the main ranch house was accomplished with all 4 of them on Wyatt's patient mare. The Thornhill Ranch House appeared through the trees like something out of a storybook, a sprawling structure of dark wood and stone. 2 stories tall with a wrap-around porch, and actual glass windows that reflected the morning sun. It was easily the finest building Margot had seen since leaving Kansas City. Before Margot could respond, the front door banged open, and a small, formidable woman emerged onto the porch. She was Norwegian, Margot realized. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her clothes were practical and spotless, and her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. So, this is the widow and children Wyatt tells me about. The ones living in a tent, nearly died in the storm. Yes? Margot felt heat rush to her cheeks. But she lifted her chin and met Mrs. Halverson's gaze directly. Yes, ma'am. I'm Margot Brennan. These are my children. Adelaide, Nathaniel, and Violet. Mrs. Halvorson descended the porch steps with surprising speed, circling Margot like a hawk examining prey. Too thin, all of you. But that can be fixed. What cannot be fixed is lazy or dishonest. So let me ask you straight. Are you dishonest? No, ma'am. Can you sew? Yes, ma'am. I can sew, darn, embroider, and do basic tailoring. Good. Mrs. Halvorson turned to the children, her expression softened slightly. You, oldest girl, you know how to wash dishes? Adelaide nodded mutely. You speak up when spoken to, child. Do you know how to wash dishes or not? Yes, ma'am. I can wash dishes. Then you can help in the kitchen. Boy, you know how to gather eggs? Nate's eyes widened. There's chickens? Of course there's chickens. What kind of ranch doesn't have chickens? Mrs. Halverson's lips quirked in what might have been amusement. Then you will learn. And the little one. She stays with mother, yes? Yes. Violet stays with me. Mrs. Halverson nodded decisively. Good. Then is settled. Come, I show you the workroom. Mrs. Halverson led Margot through a spotless kitchen, down a hallway lined with photographs, and into a sunlit room at the back of the house. A large table dominated the center, surrounded by baskets overflowing with clothing that needed mending. A sewing machine, an actual treadle sewing machine, sat against one wall, and shelves held neat rows of thread, buttons, patches. It was a seamstress's dream. This is the mending room. As you see, there is much work. The ranch hands are hard on clothes, always ripping, tearing, losing buttons. The old seamstress left 6 months ago to get married, and since then the pile only grows bigger. She fixed Margot with that sharp gaze again. So here is what I offer. You mend what needs mending. You work 4 days a week, mornings until afternoon. This gives you time for your children. I pay $2 per week. Plus you keep the cabin rent-free. Plus meals while you work here. She paused. Is this acceptable? $2 a week was decent wages. Add in the free cabin and meals. And it was more than decent. It was security. It was survival. It was a future. It's more than acceptable, Mrs. Halverson. It's generous, not generous, practical. I need seamstress. You need work. Everyone benefits. Now we see if you actually have the skills you claim. She pulled a shirt from the nearest basket. Fix this. Show me your work. Margot took the shirt, examined the damage, and moved to the shelves to select thread and buttons. Her hands were shaking slightly from nerves. But once she sat at the table with needle and thread, muscle memory took over. She'd been sewing since childhood. She repaired the torn sleeve with tiny, nearly invisible stitches. She replaced all the buttons, making sure they were sewn on securely. When she finished, she handed the shirt back for inspection. Mrs. Halverson examined it closely, turned it inside and out, tugged on the repair work, tested the buttons. Finally, she nodded. Good, very good. Your mother taught you well. Relief flooded through Margot. Stop thanking me and start working. You have 3 months of backlog to catch up on, and just like that, Margot found herself employed. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm Margot hadn't experienced since before Daniel died. Over the next 6 weeks, she woke each morning to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. She dressed her children in proper clothes that fit. She made breakfast from supplies that didn't have to be rationed. 4 mornings a week, she walked the mile to the ranch house with her children. Violet, riding on her hip, and the older 2 skipping ahead. Mrs. Halverson would be waiting on the porch. Imperious and efficient, the work itself was satisfying in a way Margot hadn't expected. There was something deeply peaceful about sitting at that big table, needle and thread in hand, transforming torn clothing back into serviceable garments. Each repaired seam represented order restored. Problem solved. Adelaide thrived in the kitchen, learning from Mrs. Halverson with eager attention. The older woman taught her how to knead bread, how to season soup, how to tell when meat was properly cooked. Nate had found his calling with the chickens, developing a rapport with the birds that amused everyone. He'd named them all. Ridiculous names like General Feathers and Lady Cluckington. And Violet had been adopted by the entire household as a kind of communal pet. But it was Wyatt whose presence shaped their days in ways both obvious and subtle. He came by the cabin most evenings, usually with some practical excuse, checking that the roof was sound, bringing firewood, fixing the shutter that had started to hang crooked. Always there was a reason. Margot pretended to believe these excuses, just as Wyatt pretended they were true. And they maintained this careful fiction because the alternative was too dangerous to examine directly. The children had no such reservation. They adored Wyatt with uncomplicated enthusiasm. Nate, especially, had attached himself to the foreman with an intensity that worried Margot sometimes. The boy followed Wyatt around whenever possible, pestering him with questions about horses and cattle and ranch work. One evening in late September, as Wyoming summer was finally surrendering to autumn's cooler embrace, Wyatt arrived at the cabin with a surprise. You remember that mare that foaled back in June? Wyatt asked, and Nate nodded so vigorously. Margot worried he'd hurt his neck. Well, Mr. Thornhill decided the cult needs someone to gentle him proper, get him used to being handled. Thought maybe you'd like to help with that. If your mother agrees, of course. Nate's eyes went so wide Margot could see white all around the irises. Really? You mean it? I could help with a real horse? Hold on. Nathaniel's 5 years old. Isn't that too young? What if he gets hurt? I'll be with him the whole time. We're just teaching the colt to accept a halter. Basic gentle handling, nothing dangerous. Sam here strikes me as someone who'd be good at it. Patient, kind. He looked at Nate with an expression of such genuine respect. What do you say, son? Think you can handle that responsibility? Nate was practically vibrating with eagerness, but he turned to Margot with a pleading expression. Please, Mama. I'll be so careful, I promise. Margot looked from her son's desperate hope to Wyatt's steady confidence. All right. But at the first sign of danger, this arrangement ends. Understood? Understood. While Nate launched himself at Margot in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked her over. There's something else, Wyatt said. And Margot turned her attention back to him. He looked uncharacteristically uncertain. There's a church social in Green River next Saturday evening. Music, dancing, food. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to go with me. All of you, the children, too. Margot's heart did something complicated in her chest. A church social. With Wyatt, that was courting. I don't know. People talk. People are already talking. Widow living alone in a cabin. Foreman visiting most evenings. Green River's had plenty to gossip about already. Might as well give something worth gossiping over. But I don't have anything suitable to wear. Mrs. Halvorson mentioned she's got a dress she thinks would fit you. Margot realized this had been planned. Arranged between the two of them before he ever came to ask her, Mama, can we go? Adelaide asked. Appearing in the doorway where she'd clearly been eavesdropping. There'll be other children there. And music? Papa always said he'd take us when we got settled, Nate added. But then, he didn't finish the sentence. They all knew how that story ended. Margot looked at her children's hopeful faces, at Wyatt's careful expression, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. All right, we'll go. The smile that broke across Wyatt's face was like sunrise. Saturday arrived faster than Margot expected. Mrs. Halvorson had indeed provided a dress. A simple calico in deep blue with cream-colored buttons. Margot worked late into the night by firelight to alter it, taking it in at the waist, letting out the hem. When she finally tried on the finished product, Adelaide gasped, Mama. You look so pretty. The woman looking back at her in the small cracked mirror was thinner than she remembered. Her face more angular, her eyes older, but the dress fit well. And with her hair washed and properly braided, she looked almost like her old self. When Wyatt arrived at 6 as promised, Margot saw his eyes widen slightly. Well, don't you all look fine? He'd clearly made an effort himself. His shirt was clean and pressed, his boots polished, his hair still damp from washing. He'd even shaved, revealing a strong jawline that Margot realized she'd never properly seen beneath the usual stubble. Green River on a Saturday evening was transformed. Lanterns hung from storefronts and trees, casting a warm glow over the main street. The church had its doors thrown open, and music spilled out into the evening air. Margot felt her stomach clench with anxiety. These people knew her, or knew of her, the desperate widow who'd been living in a tent. What would they think seeing her here now, arriving with Wyatt Thorne? Hey, you're doing that thing where you worry about what people think. Stop it. You have as much right to be here as anyone. The social was held in the church hall, a large room with wooden floors, long tables laden with food, and musicians warming up with fiddle, guitar and banjo. The room was crowded with people Margot vaguely recognized. Several heads turned when they entered. Margot felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispers, but before her anxiety could fully take hold, Mrs. Halvorson materialized at her elbow. You look good. The dress fits perfect, yes? Come. I introduce you properly, not as desperate widow, but as my seamstress, who does excellent work. And just like that, Margot found herself being paraded around the room. Several women Margot had previously approached for work now greeted her with cautious friendliness, perhaps remembering that they'd turned her away, and feeling awkward about it. When the music started in earnest, the dance floor began to fill. Margot watched from the sidelines, her foot tapping unconsciously. It had been so long since she danced. Dance with me, Wyatt said beside her. I don't know if I should. People are already talking. Let them talk. One dance, Margot. When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Margot couldn't remember. All right. One dance. His hand closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady, and he led her onto the dance floor just as the fiddle player launched into a waltz. They moved awkwardly at first, Margot stumbling over her own feet, hyper-aware of his hand at her waist. But Wyatt just smiled at her, encouraging and gentle, and slowly she relaxed into the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You're doing fine. Just relax and trust me to lead. Trust. Such a small word for such an enormous ask. But Margot found that she did trust him. The waltz ended and another began, and they kept dancing. Margot stopped worrying about the watching eyes, stopped caring what people might say. She let herself simply be. When they finally left the floor, Adelaide ran up immediately. Mama, you looked so beautiful out there. You looked perfect, Wyatt said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made Margot's breath catch. One evening in late October, as the first real cold snap of autumn had them all huddled near the fire, Wyatt arrived with news that made his expression troubled. What happened? Margot asked. Mr. Thornhill's nephew arrived from Philadelphia yesterday, Preston Thornhill. He's here about the ranch. Margot felt cold dread settle in her stomach. What does that mean? Preston's made an offer to buy the entire operation. He's offering substantially more money than Mr. Thornhill would get from selling me a partnership share. So what does that mean for you? It means if Mr. Thornhill sells to him, I lose the opportunity I've been working toward for years. But you'd still have your job, maybe. Or maybe Preston brings in his own people. That's what businessmen from back east tend to do. Get rid of anyone who might represent the old way of doing things. If Wyatt lost his position, he'd have to leave. Maybe leave Green River entirely. And if he left, Margot, whatever happens, this doesn't change what I feel for you. If I have to leave, I'll find a way to come back. Or I'll take you with me. I'm not letting you go. You can't promise that. You can't know what choices you'll have to make. And I can't uproot my children again. Not when they're finally settled. Then I'll stay. I'll find work at another ranch nearby. Margot, I meant what I said. I want a future with you. Margot wanted to believe him, but she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. We'll figure it out. Yet. But we'll find a way. Trust me, Margot. She wanted to. She did trust him, trusted his intentions, his sincerity. What she didn't trust was the universe. But she nodded against his chest anyway, choosing hope over fear. The next weeks were tense with uncertainty. Preston Thornhill was apparently taking his time, and the waiting was excruciating. Margot threw herself into her work, taking on extra projects, saving every penny. In case everything fell apart again, Adelaide became extra good, extra responsible. Nate became quieter, more withdrawn. Even Violet seemed affected, more clingy than usual. It was Mrs. Halverson who finally confronted Margot about it. You are walking around like ghost. This is because of the nephew, yes? Because of worry about Wyatt's position? Margot nodded miserably. If Mr. Thornhill sells, everything changes. Wyatt might lose his job. We might lose the cabin. And I can't go through that again. Mrs. Halverson was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed heavily. I will tell you something, but you must promise not to repeat it. Not even to Wyatt, not yet. Margot nodded. Mr. Thornhill is not fool. He sees what his nephew is. A man who cares about money, not about land or people. Preston wants to buy the property, but he will not care for it the way it deserves. She leaned forward. Mr. Thornhill talks to me, and he has said he would prefer to see Wyatt become his partner, that he trusts Wyatt to maintain what has been built here. The nephew's offer is tempting, but easy is not was all right. So what are you saying? I am saying that Mr. Thornhill needs reason to choose the harder path, a reminder of what matters more than money, and I think you might be that reason. Margot didn't understand, but Mrs. Halverson smiled. Small and knowing, Mr. Thornhill cares about family, about legacy. His nephew has no children, no wife, but Wyatt. If Wyatt had family, had children who would grow up on this ranch. That would mean something to Mr. Thornhill. The implication hit Margot like a thunderbolt. You're saying I should force Wyatt's hand? I am saying you should stop waiting for life to happen to you and start making choices about what you want. You love Wyatt, yes? Margot hesitated, then pushed through her fear, yes. Yes, I love him, and he loves you. Except you are both being so careful. Waiting for perfect time that may never come, Mrs. Halverson stood. Sometimes the perfect time is right now. Sometimes you must leap before you are ready. That evening when Wyatt arrived, Margot made a decision. She waited until the children were in bed, until they had privacy on the porch, and then she took a deep breath and dove in. Wyatt, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer, honestly. He turned to her, concern in his eyes, of course. Ask me anything. Margot gathered her courage. If you could have what you wanted, the partnership, the ranch house, a family to fill it with, would you want that with me? Would you want to marry me? Raise my children as yours? Wyatt stared at her, stunned into silence. Margot pushed forward before she lost her nerve. Because I love you, Wyatt Thorne. I think I've loved you since you pulled us out of that storm. And I know it's only been a few months, and I know there are 1,000 practical reasons why we should wait. But I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of being careful. So I'm asking you, will you marry me? For a moment that stretched into eternity, Wyatt just stared. Margot's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Then Wyatt's face transformed. Wonder and joy breaking across his features, he reached into his vest pocket with trembling hands and pulled out a small velvet box. I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, trying to work up the courage to ask you the same question. My mother's ring. I wanted to wait until the situation was settled. But Margot, he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a single pearl. Yes. God, yes, I'll marry you. He slipped from the porch to kneel before her on one knee. Margot Brennan, you've asked me to marry you, and I've said yes. But let me ask you proper, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me be a father to Adelaide and Nathaniel and Violet? Yes. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and then he was standing, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been building for months. Margot kissed him back with equal fervor. She heard squealing from inside the cabin and realized the children had been watching. The door burst open, and all three came tumbling out, Adelaide launching herself at Wyatt, Nate grabbing his legs, Violet toddling over with arms raised. Does this mean you're going to be our papa? Nate asked. If you'll have me. If you want me to be your papa, we want it. We've wanted it forever. Can I call you Papa now? You can call me whatever you want. Papa, Pa. Dad, Papa. Nate decided immediately. Papa Wyatt. Violet patted Wyatt's face. Papa. They stayed on the porch for another hour, too excited to think about sleep, making plans and dreaming aloud about the future. The next morning they rode together to the main ranch house to share their news. Mrs. Halverson took one look at them and announced, finally. I thought you two would never stop being so careful with each other. She examined the ring with a critical eye and nodded approvingly. Good choice, simple, elegant. Now we must tell Mr. Thornhill. This will matter to him. She led them to Mr. Thornhill's study. The old rancher looked up when they entered, and Margot saw him take in their joined hands. The ring on her finger. Well, this looks like news worth hearing, Mr. Thornhill. I'd like to introduce you to my fiancée, Margot Brennan. We're engaged to be married, are you now? And when did this happen? Last night, sir. I know the timing might seem sudden. Sudden? Son, I've been watching you court this lady for months. The only sudden thing is that it took you so long. The whole ranch has been taking bets. Wyatt looked stunned, sir. I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the ranch, my commitment to Margot and her children stands. But I'm hoping we might still have a future here. Mr. Thornhill was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. My nephew Preston is offering me substantial sum. From purely financial standpoint, accepting his offer would be smart choice. Margot felt her stomach drop. But Wyatt's hand tightened on hers. However, I didn't build this ranch to be smart with money. I built it to be home legacy. Preston sees this place as investment opportunity. Nothing more. He'd run it like business. He stood slowly, and walked to the window. You know what I see when I look out there? I see the life my wife and I built together. I see 30 years of hard work and good people. And when I think about this place after I'm gone, I don't want to imagine it transformed into corporate operation. He turned back to face them. You've been with me for 8 years, Wyatt. I've watched you grow into fine foreman. Good man. And now you're telling me you're starting family. Putting down roots, he paused. Mrs. Brennan, you've been through hell. You've survived what would have broken lesser people. And you've raised 3 good children. That speaks to character. Those are the kind of people I want running this ranch. Sir, I'm turning down my nephew's offer. I'm moving forward with our partnership agreement. You'll have 6 months to come up with your portion. And in the meantime, you and your new family can move into the main house. Foreman, who's also partner, should live in the main house. Margot couldn't contain her gasp. The main house. The beautiful, spacious home for her and her children. Mr. Thornhill, I don't know what to say. Say you'll take care of this place the way it deserves. Say you'll raise those children to know what it means to build something with your own hands. Say you'll make this ranch into the home it's always been meant to be. I promise. We both do. We'll honor what you've built here. I know you will. Now get out of my office. And let me break the news to my nephew. They left the study in a daze, hardly able to process what had just happened. The partnership, the house, the future, all of it was theirs. I can't believe it, Margot whispered. Is this really happening? It's happening. You and me and the children in that house. This is real, Margot. This is our second chance. The wedding was set for mid-December, 6 weeks away. Margot and Mrs. Halverson threw themselves into preparations, a ceremony at Green River Church. Simple but meaningful. Adelaide was beside herself with excitement about being junior bridesmaid. Nate had been tasked with being ring bearer. Violet would be flower girl. Moving into the main house was an overwhelming experience. Margot stood in the large kitchen with its cast iron stove and multiple work surfaces, and had to sit down because the contrast with the tent where she'd once tried to cook over open fire was too much. The children ran through the rooms shrieking with delight, claiming bedrooms, exploring closets. This is too much. We don't deserve this. You deserve everything. You've earned this 1,000 times over. Stop questioning it and just let yourself be happy. The wedding day arrived, December 18th, cold but brilliantly clear, with sunlight sparkling off snow, and Wyoming sky that particular shade of blue that seemed impossible anywhere else. Margot stood in the church's small preparation room, her hands shaking as Adelaide and Mrs. Halverson helped her with final adjustments. She'd made the dress herself, from red wool Wyatt had given her, a simple gown with lace at the collar and cuffs. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The gaunt, desperate woman who'd lived in tent was gone, replaced by someone who looked healthy, happy, loved. Mama, you look like princess. Adelaide breathed. She looks like bride, which is better than princess. Because it is real. Is it normal to be this nervous? I've done this before. I shouldn't be this scared. It is different this time. First time you were young. You did not know what marriage meant, what life would bring. This time you know. You have seen the worst life can offer, and you are choosing this anyway. That makes it more precious, but also more frightening. Margot nodded. But Mama. Papa Wyatt isn't going anywhere. He promised. He always keeps his promises. The simple faith in her daughter's voice steadied Margot. There was knock on the door. We're ready when you are, Mrs. Brennan. Margot took deep breath. I'm ready. The ceremony was blur of sensory details. The church, decorated with pine boughs and white ribbons, Nate standing at the front with the rings, his face serious with responsibility. Violet, toddling down the aisle, scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than precision. And then there was Wyatt, waiting at the altar in new suit. His eyes locked on Margot as she walked toward him. The Reverend spoke words about love and commitment, but Margot heard them as if from distant. All her attention was focused on Wyatt, on the man who'd refused to ride past desperate family, who'd seen worth in her when she could see none in herself. Do you, Margot Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Margot thought about Daniel, About the first time she'd said these words, young and naive, she thought about how wrong she'd been, but she also thought about the woman she'd become since then. Stronger, wiser, more resilient. She thought about how she'd survived what should have killed her. "I do," she said clearly. "And do you, Wyatt Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Wyatt said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Wyatt pulled Margot close and kissed her with gentleness that made her heart ache, and the church erupted in applause. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. Happy tears this time. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, out into the cold December sunlight where rice and flower petals were thrown. The children swarmed them immediately. Nate talking mile-minute, Adelaide beaming, Violet demanding to be picked up. And Margot stood there holding Wyatt's hand, surrounded by her children and this community, and felt her heart expand with something that felt dangerously, wonderfully, like complete and total happiness. Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed, Margot and Wyatt stood in the parlor of their house, looking around at the space that would hold their future. "I have something for you," Wyatt said, disappearing into the study, and returning with wooden box. "I've been working on this for months." Margot opened the box to find small metal nameplate, "The Thorne Family Ranch. Wyatt, founded 1873. Nathaniel. Violet, I wanted you to know that this isn't just my dream. This is ours. Your name belongs here just as much as mine. The children's names belong here. This is our family's legacy now." Margot felt tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect. You're perfect. Not perfect. Real. Better than perfect, because it's real. And earned. And ours." And standing there in their home with their children sleeping upstairs, Margot finally let herself believe in second chances, in hope, in love that could bloom even in the harshest conditions, in the truth that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. That cowboy had said she'd sleep under roof that night. She hadn't known he was offering her everything: a home, a partner, a father for her children, a future she'd stopped believing was possible. From tent to ranch house, from despair to hope, from barely surviving to truly living. The journey had been hard, but they'd made it, together, and that made all the difference.